Yeah, so the Dark and Stormy. So legend has it. Um, well, I think it's important to note that so the British Navy was based in Bermuda shortly after the First World War in the Royal Naval Dockyard, and what they brought to Bermuda was ginger beer. They had a whole manufacturing plant for ginger beer there. I guess sailors loved it, and they would use it as like an ailment for seasickness. And it took the locals no time to figure out that their ginger beer goes really well with the local rum. And so that quickly became a popular mixed drink here. And legend has it, one of these, it was a dark and stormy night, and all the British naval officers were at the Royal Bermuda Yacht Club in Hamilton having a great time. And one of the sailors had a bit too much to drink, and the bartender actually tried to cut him off. And he wasn't just going to cut him off by telling him, he was just going to give him a glass of ginger beer. Of course, this sailor took one sip, realized there was no rum in it, piped back at the bartender, and the bartender eventually poured some rum in his drink. And he noticed that the rum actually sits on top of the ginger beer perfectly. So the sailor kind of picks up this drink, looks at it, and says, that looks like a storm cloud neither a fool or a dead man would sail under. Followed by barkeep, pass me another dark and stormy. And that, with the name alone, became the national drink of Bermuda. We don't even really have a national anthem, but we have a national cocktail. We're still a British territory, so I guess
yeah,
God
fair enough.
Name. But yeah, and it was something that we were able to trademark the cocktail in 1980, which is impossible to do. And I think one of the main reasons why we were able to do it is because no one knew what Gosling's was or what a Dark and Stormy was. And why it's important is because it really does, even though it's a simple cocktail, 2 ingredients, once you substitute Gosling's Black Seal with anything else, whether it's another type of rum, whatever, it's not to say one's better than the other. You're just changing that cocktail. You're changing the taste of it. And it's become such, again, national drink of Bermuda. But what we do, why we did it, is we want to create that consistency that while you have this drink for the first time while you're here in Bermuda, you can go back to Massachusetts and relive that same experience. And yeah, it's I think it's only one of 3 trademark cocktails.
Yeah, the Aperol Spritz is trademarked. And back in 2015, they trademarked that. So, and again, trademarks are you have to trademark things in every country that you go to, right? So,
I know.
you know, yeah. so, you know, there's some, I'm sure there's some libations that are trademarked in some places, but not others. But, you know, I just presented, well, I should back up. I just ran an entire cocktail competition for the American Distilling Institute for their conference and trade show last month in San Antonio.
Awesome.
And we did what was called the Signature Serve Invitational, where we paired up 5 of the best bartenders in Texas with 5 Texas distillers. And so as part of that, I did this entire hour-long seminar on sort of like what the DNA of a signature serve cocktail is. And obviously, I featured the Dark and Stormy really prominently in that because it is so iconic. To me, it's the first cocktail that jumps to mind for me when somebody says signature serve, you know, referring to a cocktail. And this is the definition that I put on it, which is a simple, right? 2 ingredients, to your point, viral cocktail. We can talk, and a lot of what this seminar involved was talking about how exactly that virality is achieved. Simple viral cocktail that features a specific product by a specific brand. So to me, that is the definition of the Dark and Stormy. And I love this. I love the story of the drunk guy, because it sort of it was because it was right there, and it takes someone. It's almost like a litmus test. If a drunk guy can both A, notice that the Gosling's rum is missing, and B, identify this very obvious visual picture that is created in the glass by this layering effect, and say, hey, like, what does this look like? Well, it's obvious what this looks like. And
Right.
like that validates the virality of it, because you don't even need to be paying particular attention to be able to notice how special this is, right? It's the specific color of the rum and the ginger beer. And what I think makes it work the best is that the more you dig into it, the better it feels, right? The more you research about Bermuda, the more you learn about how it's like shipwreck is a part of its history. I don't know if you can
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, Bermuda, I think it was, I don't know when exactly it was known as this, but it was called the Isle of Devils because Bermuda is surrounded by coral reefs about a few miles out that you can't really see. And so these ships would know. So these ships would get shipwrecked on those coral reefs, and their livestock, the ones that would actually make it, would swim to shore. And so at one point, Bermuda just had a ton of hogs on the island. And so you know that there's a really good chance that you could get into a shipwreck the closer you go to this island. And you heard the squealing of the hogs back then. Um, but yeah, there's a ton of history. And yeah, from shipwrecks, um, which there are so many of, and just unbelievable scuba diving, and to just everything in Bermuda. When it comes to golf or sport, even if you're just going to the beach, it's some of the most beautiful beaches. I know I'm biased, but I have yet to find a beach that compares to the beaches on South Shore in Bermuda.
So I imagine there's a lot of people at that beach who probably would like to enjoy or do in fact enjoy a Dark and Stormy as they vacation. What to you is there any way you can break this drink, right? Or like or maybe put differently, in a positive sense, how does one make a proper Dark and Stormy, as opposed to, let's assume we're using Gosling's rum, because otherwise it's not a Dark and Stormy. But is there an art to building this, or choosing the ingredients, right? Are we squeezing the lime? Are we leaving the lime out? Is the lime optional? Is there a specific type or spiciness of ginger beer? I know that you obviously manufacture your own. Maybe there's a specific sweet spot you're trying to hit with that. What are the characteristics of the Dark and Stormy that are important above and beyond ginger beer float of Goslings?
Yeah, I think once you get down to that, it's personal preference. I mean, I love some like a squeeze of lime or two limes in mine. My father hates lime juice in his, and but he'll do a squeeze of lime. Um, but yeah, I think when it's really built correctly, when you put in, you're talking about like a 12-ounce glass, put in 6 ounces of ginger beer, and then you're able to float the rum on top with a lime wedge. I mean, it's so easy. It's really hard to mess that up. But even with that, for people trying it for the first time, you see them just take it, don't stir it, and just take a sip.
Ooh.
So yeah, and it's just like, and they make a face, and it's like, well, you just took a shot from. But at the same time, like if you're running a bar or restaurant, I think again, I'm very biased. There's nothing better than someone coming out with a tray full of Dark and Stormies poured that way, and people love to see it and they point it out. And um, going back to you talking about how the virality of it, um, yeah, catches on. But um, as far as ginger beer goes, when obviously I would say the best ginger beer to pair with it is our ginger beer, because we created our ginger beer in 2009, so fairly recently. And the whole reason why we created it is because we couldn't find a ginger beer in the U.S. Um, there either wasn't a good one, or there really wasn't anything available. Like, the knowledge on what ginger beer was kind of non-existent. Um, and so we kind of, and it obviously was there at some point in the U.S. I mean, Moscow mules, I think, were big in the 1950s, but since then, yeah, it wasn't there. So when we created Gosling Stormy ginger beer, it was with one thing in mind, and that was to create a ginger beer that was the perfect ginger beer for a Dark N Stormy. So it's not too sweet, it's not too spicy. It's really balancing that, and it took a long time. I'm using the royal we as well too. It was my father, with a company that you mentioned as well, Polar Beverages with Ralph Corelli, which is
Mm-hmm.
another family-owned business. Um, but yeah, and that's kind of just a wild story in itself, because when we first started doing that, the only places that we were really trying to hit with that ginger beer were the bars and restaurants, so we could serve Dark N Stormies. And so we started selling it through our liquor wholesalers in the U.S., which got it into the bars and restaurants. And then a few years after that, it was just wild how the ginger beer took on a life of its own, and Moscow mules came back, and yeah, it's still going. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to go
Huh.
to a bar now and you can't find a ginger beer in the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't even thought of the Moscow Mule sort of kick, because you're right, that did sort of take off as the cocktail renaissance was restarting again. You know, you see the proliferation of the copper mugs come out, and
Exactly.
yeah, that's amazing. You know, you were talking about the tray full of Dark and Stormies coming out. Presumably we're seated on like a covered patio having some light island fare for lunch, and this tray of Dark and Stormies comes out.
Exactly.
um that is exactly one of the virality touch points that I talked about, because whether you're thinking about that or you're at an Italian or a Mediterranean spot and you see the tray full of Aperol spritzes go by with those bright orange wheel garnishes, it's the same thing that happens. They call it the fajita effect, where, if you go to
Yeah.
the Mexican restaurant, you order the fajitas, they do it tableside, and as soon as the kitchen sees an order of those, they start prepping several more orders, because they know somebody's going to be just sitting down and say, I didn't know what I wanted until that went by, but I will have one of those.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Um,
even the Moscow mule with the mule mugs, the copper mugs.
mhm.
Um, yeah. And another, I mean, again, it's just so easy to make too. So it's easy. There's a lot of cocktails that you could go to a bar and have, and for the average consumer, there's no chance if it's 5, 6 ingredient thing. Even though home bartending is really becoming a thing and people are getting into it, I mean, the chances of them going back and trying to make that exact cocktail again is pretty slim.
Right. Right.
But just having that ability to, wow, that's all that goes into this. Yeah, I can make this at home.
The other two aspects that I love about it that you mentioned in your explication is the choose your own adventure aspect, right? So you've got the optionality of the lime juice, right? Some people like it, some people don't. So there's this slight customization factor to it. And then there's also the interactivity aspect of it, right? You mentioned that some people who don't quite know exactly what they're getting into take a sip right off the top and they have a bad experience with it. But I think the inverse of that, right? Somebody who does know what they're getting into takes a little hit of delight from being able to take the straw, do a little stir, and transform the cocktail. Like, it's a little visual transformation that happens right before your eyes. You are the practitioner of that little piece of magic. And it's like what you're doing is you're dispelling the storm, right? And so to me, what I associate, there's certain signature serve cocktails that I associate really heavily with certain things. They come to almost embody something bigger than themselves, right? The Jaeger bomb embodies youth and party energy. The painkiller cocktail, right? Pusser's rum, another rum cocktail.
Yeah.
That, to me, there might be some cocktails that can do tropical decadence as good as the painkiller, but no cocktail does it better. And with the Dark and Stormy, right, as like everything from the origin story to its home setting, to the stirring of that rum float so that you're dispelling the storm, it gives this impression of safe in port, that you're in a safe harbor.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what that cocktail has come to stand for. So I don't know, I appreciate it so much.
Yeah.